When the high priests of the sacred temple of Varanasi banned 19-year-old Meera Sharma from entering their holy grounds, they thought they were silencing a troublesome outsider who threatened their ancient traditions. They had no idea they were about to unleash a voice so powerful it would literally crack the foundation stones of their temple and expose centuries of corruption that had rotted the heart of their sacred institution. What happened next would transform not just one young woman's life, but the entire spiritual landscape of northern India. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Meera Sharma had grown up in the shadow of the magnificent Temple of Eternal Light in Varanasi, one of India's most revered religious sites. Born into a family of street musicians in the narrow alleys of the old city, she had spent her childhood listening to the ancient chants and prayers that echoed from the temple's marble halls. Her mother Kamala sold flower garlands to pilgrims outside the temple gates, while her father Ravi played tabla drums for coins from tourists visiting the sacred Ganges riverbank. From the age of 5, Meera had possessed a voice unlike anything her family had ever heard. When she sang traditional bhajans during their evening prayers, neighbors would gather in their small courtyard to listen in wonder. Her voice carried a quality that seemed to resonate not just in the air, but in the very souls of those who heard it. Local musicians claimed her vocal range defied natural explanation, capable of producing harmonics that created physical vibrations in stone and wood. The trouble began when Meera turned 17 and started joining the daily prayer gatherings outside the temple walls. Hundreds of devotees would gather each morning to participate in communal worship, singing ancient Sanskrit hymns and offering prayers to the divine. Meera's voice, even when she tried to blend into the crowd, stood out like a beacon of pure sound that seemed to amplify the spiritual energy of the entire gathering. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Temple priests initially welcomed the young woman whose voice enhanced their morning ceremonies, but Meera's presence began to create unexpected problems for the temple's corrupt leadership. Her singing was so pure and powerful that it drew massive crowds, often numbering in the thousands, who came specifically to hear her participate in the prayers. More troubling for the temple authorities, Meera's presence seemed to inspire a spiritual awakening among the devotees that challenged the priest's control over religious practice. High Priest Maharaja Indra Prasad, a man who had spent 30 years accumulating wealth and political power through his position at the temple, watched with growing alarm as Meera's influence expanded. The temple's revenue model depended on maintaining strict hierarchies that required devotees to pay substantial fees for access to sacred rituals and blessings. But when Meera sang, people seemed to find direct spiritual connection that bypassed the expensive intermediary services the priests provided. "This girl is disrupting the sacred order," Prasad complained to his inner circle of senior priests during a private meeting in his luxuriously appointed chambers. "People are coming to hear her voice instead of seeking proper spiritual guidance through established channels. She's undermining our authority." The final provocation came during the festival of Diwali, when Meera's voice during the evening prayer ceremony created an acoustic phenomenon that no one could explain. As she sang the ancient Gayatri mantra, her voice seemed to resonate with the temple's architecture itself, creating harmonic vibrations that made the massive stone walls vibrate visibly. Pilgrims described feeling the sound waves through their entire bodies, creating a shared spiritual experience that many called transcendent. Videos of the event, captured on smartphones by amazed devotees, went viral across social media platforms. Within days, thousands of people were traveling to Varanasi specifically to hear Meera sing, creating logistical challenges for the temple and drawing unwanted attention from government officials investigating reports of unusual acoustic phenomena. More dangerous to Prasad's interests, several prominent religious scholars began studying the recordings and declaring that Meera's voice demonstrated classical techniques described in ancient Sanskrit texts that most modern practitioners had lost. Dr. Ananda Krishnamurthy, a professor of sacred music at Banaras Hindu University, publicly stated that Meera appeared to be employing vocal methods that hadn't been heard for centuries. "This young woman seems to have intuitively rediscovered acoustic principles that our ancestors used to create direct spiritual experiences through sound," Dr. Krishnamurthy told a gathering of religious scholars. Her technique suggests that our modern understanding of sacred music has been diluted over generations of institutional control. The scholar's comments implied that the temple priests had allowed authentic spiritual practices to deteriorate while focusing on political and financial power. For Prasad, this represented an existential threat to the authority structure that sustained his position and wealth. The ban came suddenly and without warning. On a cool November morning, as Meera approached the temple gates for the daily prayer gathering, she was confronted by temple guards who informed her that she was no longer welcome on temple grounds. The official explanation was that her presence had become disruptive to traditional worship practices, and that she needed to obtain formal religious training before participating in sacred ceremonies. "But I've been coming here every morning for 2 years, Meera protested to the head guard, a man named Suresh, who had always greeted her kindly. "I'm not disrupting anything, I'm just singing prayers like everyone else." Suresh looked uncomfortable as he delivered the message he had been ordered to give. "The high priest has decided that your unusual vocal abilities require proper supervision before you can participate in temple activities. You'll need to complete formal training and receive certification from the temple authorities." Meera understood immediately that this was not about training or certification. The formal training would cost money her family didn't have, and the certification process would give Prasad control over when and how she could use her voice in religious settings. It was a system designed to exclude people like her while maintaining the appearance of religious propriety. Standing outside the temple gates as the morning prayer session began without her, Meera felt a mixture of heartbreak and growing anger. She could hear the devotees inside singing the same hymn she had joined for years, but their voices seemed flat and lifeless without the harmonic enhancement her presence had provided. More importantly, she could sense the spiritual energy that had made these gatherings so powerful beginning to dissipate. But as Meera walked away from the temple that morning, she carried within her voice a power that no religious authority could truly control. The priests had succeeded in banning her from their building, but they could not ban her from her connection to the divine source that made her voice so extraordinary. What they would discover in the coming weeks was that true spiritual power cannot be contained by institutional barriers, and that the voice they thought they had silenced was about to find ways to reach people that would challenge everything they believed about their own authority. After being banned from the Temple of Eternal Light, Meera found herself at the center of an unexpected spiritual revolution that began in the narrow alleyways and hidden courtyards of old Varanasi. Word of her exclusion from the temple spread quickly through the close-knit community of devotees, musicians and spiritual seekers who had been drawn to her voice, and their response surprised even Meera herself. The first gathering happened spontaneously 3 days after the ban. Meera had been helping her mother prepare flower garlands in their small courtyard when she began singing softly to herself, a habit she had developed during childhood to make mundane work feel sacred. Within minutes, neighbors began appearing at their door, drawn by the familiar sound of her voice carrying the ancient melodies they had grown to love. "We don't need the temple to pray," declared Sita Devi, an elderly woman who had been attending the morning gatherings for 15 years. "The divine doesn't live in buildings built by corrupt priests. It lives in voices like yours that help us remember what true devotion feels like." Within an hour, more than 50 people had crowded into the Sharma family's modest courtyard, creating an impromptu prayer circle that felt more spiritually charged than anything they had experienced in the official temple ceremonies. As Meera sang the evening prayers, her voice seemed to transform the humble space into something sacred, proving that the power of her gift had nothing to do with ornate architecture or institutional approval. Ravi Sharma, Meera's father, was initially worried about the attention his daughter was attracting. "The temple priests have influence with local authorities," he warned his wife that evening. "If they think we're trying to compete with them, they could cause serious problems for our family." But Kamala, who had watched her daughter's gift develop over the years, believed they had a responsibility to share Meera's voice with people who needed spiritual connection. "The priests banned her because they're afraid of losing control," she told her husband. "But spirituality isn't something that can be owned or controlled. If our daughter can help people find peace and connection to the divine, then we have to support her." The underground prayer gatherings quickly evolved into something more organized and widespread. Dr. Ananda Krishnamurthy, the professor who had publicly praised Meera's vocal techniques, approached the family with a proposal to study and document her methods while providing a more sophisticated framework for the growing movement. "What you're doing here is revolutionary, Dr. Krishnamurthy told Meera during his first visit to their courtyard. You're demonstrating that authentic spiritual practice doesn't require expensive institutional mediation, but we need to be strategic about how we develop this movement if we want to create lasting change." The professor brought academic credibility and historical context that helped legitimize the gatherings. He explained to participants that Meera's vocal techniques were actually closer to ancient Vedic practices than the simplified chants used in modern temples, where centuries of institutional control had gradually replaced authentic spiritual methods with more manageable rituals. The original Sanskrit texts describe sound meditation techniques that were designed to create direct spiritual experiences, Dr. Krishnamurthy explained during one of the evening gatherings. Most temples have lost touch with these authentic practices because they require genuine spiritual development rather than just memorized rituals. As word spread about the underground prayer circles, people began traveling from other cities to participate in the gatherings. Social media posts and YouTube videos of Meera's singing attracted attention from spiritual seekers, musicians, and researchers who were fascinated by the acoustic phenomena her voice created. The small courtyard became insufficient for the growing crowds, forcing the organizers to find larger venues. The solution came from an unexpected source. Rajesh Gupta, a wealthy textile merchant who had attended several gatherings, offered the use of his large warehouse in the industrial district of Varanasi. The space was acoustically perfect for Meera's voice, with high ceilings and brick walls that amplified and enhanced the harmonic vibrations she created. "I've been searching for authentic spiritual practice for 20 years, Gupta told the organizers. Every temple I visited felt like a business operation designed to extract money from devotees. But when I hear Meera sing, I remember why I started seeking spiritual connection in the first place." The warehouse gatherings attracted hundreds of participants, creating a parallel spiritual community that operated entirely outside the control of the established temple hierarchy. People brought their own flowers for offerings, shared vegetarian meals prepared by volunteers, and participated in extended meditation sessions guided by Meera's voice. But the growing movement also attracted the attention of High Priest Prasad, who began receiving reports about the unauthorized religious gatherings from his network of informants. The prospect of a successful spiritual community operating independently of temple authority represented everything he feared about losing control over religious practice in the region. "This has gone far enough," Prasad declared during an emergency meeting with his senior priests. "The girl is openly challenging our authority and undermining the proper order of religious practice. We need to take decisive action before this movement spreads beyond our ability to contain it." The temple's first response was to use their political connections to pressure city officials about permits and safety regulations for large gatherings. Inspectors appeared at the warehouse claiming to investigate fire safety violations and noise complaints, though the real purpose was clearly to disrupt the prayer meetings. Meera and her supporters responded by demonstrating their commitment to proper procedures and community cooperation. They obtained all necessary permits, installed safety equipment, and worked with local authorities to ensure that their gatherings didn't create problems for neighboring businesses. The transparency and cooperation impressed city officials who found no legitimate grounds for shutting down the gatherings. "They're trying to use bureaucracy to accomplish what they couldn't achieve through religious authority," Dr. Krishnamurthy observed. "But their strategy is backfiring because it's drawing more attention to the contrast between our open cooperative approach and their secretive controlling methods." Media coverage of the permit disputes brought national attention to the story of a young woman whose voice had created a spiritual movement that challenged traditional religious hierarchies. Journalists began investigating the Temple of Eternal Light's finances and governance practices, uncovering evidence of corruption and mismanagement that had been hidden for decades. The investigation revealed that High Priest Prasad had been using temple donations to fund personal luxury purchases and political contributions, while charging excessive fees for religious services that were supposed to be freely available to all devotees. The contrast between the temple's corruption and the grassroots spiritual movement Mira had inspired became a national story about authenticity versus institutional control. As the warehouse gatherings continued to grow, Mira began developing new vocal techniques that created even more powerful acoustic effects. Working with Dr. Krishnamurti to study ancient texts, she learned to employ harmonic frequencies that seemed to induce deep meditative states in participants, creating shared spiritual experiences that many described as transformative. "I'm not trying to compete with the temple," Mira told a documentary filmmaker who was creating a film about the movement. "I just want to help people connect with the divine in whatever way feels authentic to them. If that threatens the priests, it's because they've forgotten that spirituality is supposed to be about serving others, not controlling them." But High Priest Prasad was preparing a response that would escalate the conflict far beyond bureaucratic harassment and media criticism. He was planning to use the full power of his religious and political high priest Maharaja Indra Prasad understood that subtle pressure and bureaucratic harassment had failed to stop Mira's growing spiritual movement. The warehouse gatherings were now attracting thousands of participants, including prominent citizens, academics, and even some junior priests from other temples who were drawn to the authentic spiritual practices Mira embodied. It was time for more aggressive measures. Prasad's campaign began with a systematic attempt to destroy Mira's reputation within the religious community. Using his network of allied priests and religious, he began spreading stories that questioned both her qualifications and her motives for challenging established temple authority. The Whisper campaign painted her as an attention-seeking opportunist who was exploiting people's spiritual hunger for personal gain. "The girl has no formal religious training," Prasad told a gathering of senior priests from temples across northern India. "She's never studied the sacred texts, never completed the proper initiations, never demonstrated understanding of our ancient traditions. Yet she presumes to lead people in sacred practices that require years of preparation and spiritual discipline." The accusations were carefully crafted to appeal to religious conservatives who valued traditional hierarchies and formal credentials over individual spiritual gifts. Prasad knew that many senior religious figures would be uncomfortable with the idea that a young woman from a poor family could access authentic spiritual power without going through established institutional channels. But the campaign faced immediate resistance from people who had personally experienced Mira's spiritual impact. Dr. Krishnamurti published a detailed response in the Journal of Sacred Music Studies, documenting how Mira's vocal techniques demonstrated mastery of principles described in ancient Sanskrit texts that most formally trained priests had never encountered. Ms. Sharma appears to have intuitive access to acoustic meditation methods that represent the original essence of Vedic spiritual practice, Dr. Krishnamurti wrote. Her lack of formal institutional training may actually be an advantage, as it means her techniques haven't been diluted by centuries of institutional modifications designed more for administrative control than spiritual development. The academic support for Mira infuriated Prasad, who began pressuring university administrators to discipline Dr. Krishnamurti for supporting unauthorized religious activities. The professor received warnings about his research focus and suggestions that his continued involvement with Mira's movement could affect his career prospects. When academic pressure failed to silence Dr. Krishnamurti, Prasad escalated to financial warfare. The Temple of Eternal Light was a major donor to Benares Hindu University, providing funding for religious studies programs and student scholarships. Prasad quietly informed university officials that continued temple support would depend on their handling of faculty members who supported disruptive religious activities. The financial pressure created a crisis for Dr. Krishnamurti, who was forced to choose between his academic position and his support for Mira's movement. But the professor's response surprised everyone involved. Instead of quietly backing away from the controversy, he organized a public debate on the future of authentic spiritual practice in modern India. The question facing our religious community is whether authentic spiritual development requires institutional mediation or whether it can emerge naturally from genuine devotion and practice,
Dr. Krishnamurthy announced during a press conference. Ms.
Sharma's voice and the movement it has inspired represent a test case for whether
our traditions can accommodate grassroots spiritual innovation.
The public debate held at the university's largest auditorium
attracted national media attention and religious scholars from across India.
Prasad initially refused to participate, claiming that the event was an inappropriate platform for challenging established religious authority. But public pressure and media coverage forced him to defend the temple's position publicly. The debate became a defining moment in the conflict between
institutional religious control and grassroots spiritual practice.
Prasad presented the traditional argument that religious authority required formal training, institutional oversight,
and adherence to established hierarchies that had preserved sacred knowledge for centuries.
Our traditions exist for a reason, Prasad argued. They represent thousands of years of accumulated wisdom
about how to properly approach the divine.
When individuals take it upon themselves to modify
or bypass these traditions, they risk not only their own spiritual development but the integrity of our entire religious heritage. Dr.
Krishnamurthy's response focused on evidence that Mira's techniques were actually more consistent with ancient spiritual practices than the modified rituals used in modern temples. He presented acoustic analysis of her singing that demonstrated harmonic principles described in Sanskrit texts that most
contemporary priests couldn't read or understand.
The real question is whether
our institutions have remained faithful to the original spiritual purposes they were created to serve. Dr. Krishnamurthy countered. Ms.
Sharma's voice seems to access the authentic spiritual power that our ancestors described.
While many modern temple practices appear to have been modified to serve administrative rather than spiritual purposes,
the debate's most dramatic moment came when Mira herself was invited to demonstrate her vocal technique. Singing a traditional Sanskrit mantra, her voice filled the auditorium
with harmonic frequencies that created visible vibrations in the architectural elements of the building.
The acoustic phenomenon was so powerful that several people in the audience reported
experiencing altered states of consciousness.
The demonstration proved more persuasive than any academic argument. Even skeptics in the audience had to
acknowledge that something extraordinary was happening when Mira sang something that couldn't be explained by conventional understanding of vocal techniques or religious practice.
Following the debate, public opinion began shifting decisively
in Mira's favor.
Religious communities across India started questioning
whether their own temple hierarchies were serving spiritual or administrative purposes.
Several prominent spiritual teachers publicly supported
Mira's movement, while donations poured in to support the warehouse gatherings and related community activities.
Prasad realized that his public campaign had backfired,
actually increasing Mira's credibility and national prominence.
The failed debate had positioned him as a defender
of corrupt institutional privilege while making Mira appear to be a champion of authentic spiritual practice.
We need a different approach, Prasad told his inner circle of senior priests.
Public arguments about religious authority aren't working in our favor.
We need to find a way to discredit her personally rather than
trying to defend our institutional position.
The new strategy focused on attacking
Mira's family background and suggesting that her spiritual claims were part of an elaborate fraud designed to exploit naive devotees.
Private investigators were hired to dig into the Sharma family's financial records,
looking for evidence of hidden income or suspicious donations that could be used to suggest profit motives.
But the investigation revealed exactly the opposite of what Prasad had hoped to find. The Sharma family was living in the same modest circumstances they had always known,
donating any extra money they received to support community meals and facility improvements for the warehouse gatherings.
Their financial transparency and continued simplicity
actually reinforced their credibility.
Growing increasingly desperate, Prasad began exploring
more extreme measures to shut down Mira's movement.
He contacted political allies
who owed favors to the temple, seeking ways to use government authority to accomplish what religious and academic pressure had failed to achieve. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test not just Mira's spiritual gifts but her courage in the face of institutional power that would stop at nothing to preserve its control over religious practice in northern India.
As High Priest Prasad's persecution campaign intensified, Mira found herself facing pressures that went far beyond religious disagreement. Government inspectors began conducting surprise visits to the warehouse gatherings, looking for violations of public assembly regulations. Local police started questioning participants about their activities, creating an atmosphere of surveillance and intimidation designed to discourage attendance. The harassment reached a personal level when Mira's father Ravi lost his regular employment playing tabla drums for a tourist boat company. The company owner, a man named Vinod Shah who had employed Ravi for 8 years, reluctantly explained that he had received pressure from influential customers who disapproved of his association with the Sharma family. "I'm sorry, Ravi," Shah said during the uncomfortable conversation in his office. "You're a good musician and I've never had complaints about your work, but some very important people have made it clear that continuing to employ you could affect my business relationships. I can't afford to lose their support." The economic pressure extended beyond Ravi's employment. Kamala found that several regular customers for her flower garlands began purchasing from other vendors, while small business owners in their neighborhood started treating the family with visible discomfort. The message was clear: supporting Mira's movement came with social and economic costs that many people couldn't afford. "They're trying to isolate us," Mira observed during a family discussion about their increasingly difficult circumstances. "If they can make it too expensive for people to support us, they think we'll be forced to stop the gatherings." But the persecution had an unexpected effect on Mira's spiritual development. The pressure and isolation drove her to spend more time in personal meditation and vocal practice, seeking inner strength to sustain her commitment to the movement despite external hostilities. During these extended practice sessions, she began experiencing vocal phenomena that surpassed anything she had achieved before. Working alone in a small practice room that Dr. Krishnamurthy had arranged at the university, Mira discovered that her voice could create acoustic effects that seemed to transcend normal physical limitations. Certain combinations of harmonic frequencies appeared to affect the molecular structure of nearby materials, creating vibrations in stone and metal that classical physics couldn't explain. Dr. Krishnamurthy, who observed many of these practice sessions, documented acoustic readings that challenged conventional understanding of sound wave propagation. "I'm measuring frequency patterns that should be impossible with human vocal cords," he told Mira after one particularly extraordinary session. "Your voice is accessing acoustic principles that modern science doesn't fully understand." The discoveries reinforced Mira's growing conviction that her gift represented something larger than personal talent or even traditional spiritual practice. She began to understand her voice as a conduit for spiritual energies that could affect physical reality in ways that threatened those who profited from keeping spiritual and material power separate. "Maybe that's why the priests are so afraid," Mira reflected during one of her conversations with Dr. Krishnamurthy. "If people understand that spiritual practice can create tangible changes in the physical world, it challenges the assumption that we need institutional mediation to access divine power." As Mira's abilities continued to develop, the warehouse gatherings evolved into something unprecedented in contemporary religious practice. Participants reported not just spiritual experiences but physical healing, enhanced mental clarity, and profound emotional transformation that lasted long after the sessions ended. Word spread about miraculous healings and spiritual breakthroughs that seemed to occur specifically during Mira's vocal meditations. The reports of miraculous healings attracted attention from medical researchers and journalists who documented cases of people experiencing dramatic health improvements after attending the gatherings. Dr. Priya Mehta, a neurologist from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, conducted informal studies of participants and found measurable changes in brain activity and stress hormone levels. "We're observing neurological effects that typically require pharmaceutical intervention or extensive meditation training," Dr. Mehta reported. "Participants show increased activity in brain regions associated with healing and emotional regulation, along with decreased markers of chronic stress and inflammation. The scientific validation of Mira's impact infuriated Prasad, who realized that empirical evidence was undermining his claims about unauthorized religious practice being spiritually dangerous. The combination of academic support, medical documentation, and growing public approval was creating an unstoppable momentum for Mira's movement. Prasad's response was to abandon subtle pressure in favor of direct confrontation. Using his political connections, he convinced local authorities to revoke the permits for large gatherings at the warehouse, claiming that the events posed public safety risks due to their unpredictable spiritual effects. These unauthorized religious activities are creating public disturbances and potentially dangerous psychological manipulation. Prasad told the district magistrate during a private meeting, "The government has a responsibility to protect citizens from spiritual charlatans who exploit people's religious devotion for personal gain." The permit revocation forced Mira and her supporters to choose between shutting down the gatherings or continuing them illegally. The decision came during a community meeting at the warehouse, where hundreds of participants discussed how to respond to the government pressure. "If we stop now, we're allowing corrupt officials to determine how and where people can practice their spirituality," argued Sita Devi, the elderly woman who had been one of Mira's earliest supporters. "Our ancestors didn't need government permission to worship, and neither do we." But others worried about the legal consequences of defying official orders. Rajesh Gupta, who owned the warehouse, faced potential criminal charges and property seizure if he continued hosting unauthorized gatherings. Mira made the decision that would define the next phase of her spiritual. "We'll continue the gatherings," she announced to the assembled community. "But not here, and not in any building that can be controlled by corrupt officials. We'll gather wherever we need to, and we'll trust that the divine will provide the protection and guidance we need." The decision to move the gatherings outdoors, to public spaces where people had the right to assemble peacefully, marked a new phase of direct resistance to institutional control. It also set up the confrontation that would test the full power of Mira's voice against the physical and political structures that Prasad was prepared to use to stop her. What none of them could anticipate was that Mira's voice, when unleashed without the acoustic constraints of indoor spaces, would prove capable of effects that would literally shake the foundations of the temple that had tried to silence her. The first outdoor gathering took place on the banks of the sacred Ganges River, just beyond the jurisdiction of city officials who had revoked the warehouse permits. As dawn broke over Varanasi, hundreds of people made their way down the ancient stone steps to the water's edge, carrying flowers, prayer mats, and a determination to continue their spiritual practice despite official intimidation. Mira stood on a small natural platform formed by the river stones, her voice carrying across the water and reverberating off the ancient temples that lined the opposite bank. The acoustic properties of the riverside location amplified her voice in ways that creating sound waves that seemed to travel for miles along the river valley. This is where our ancestors practiced for thousands of years," Dr. Krishnamurthy told the gathered crowd before Mira began singing. "Long before there were temples or priests or government permits, people came to this river to connect with the divine through devotion and song. We're reclaiming our spiritual heritage." As Mira began the morning prayers, her voice took on qualities that surpassed anything she had achieved in indoor settings. The open air allowed for harmonic resonances that created acoustic phenomena visible to everyone present. The surface of the Ganges began showing ripple patterns that corresponded to the frequency patterns of her voice, while birds in the surrounding trees fell silent as if listening to something beyond their normal range of hearing. But the most remarkable effect was felt by the people themselves. Participants described experiencing a level of spiritual connection that transcended individual consciousness, creating a shared awareness that seemed to link everyone present in a unified field of spiritual energy. Many reported visions, profound emotional healing, and insights that would influence their lives for years to come. High Priest Prasad watched the riverside gathering from his office window in the Temple of Eternal Light, which overlooked the section of river where Mira was singing. He could see the crowds growing larger each morning, and more troubling. He could hear Mira's voice carrying across the water with supernatural clarity that seemed to penetrate the walls of his own temple. "The situation is getting out of control," Prasad told his senior priests during an emergency meeting. "She's attracting thousands of people, including some of our own devotees who are abandoning our morning services to join her unauthorized gatherings. We're losing both attendance and revenue at an alarming rate." The financial impact on the temple was indeed significant. Daily donations had dropped by more than half as people redirected their religious devotion to the free gatherings at the riverside. More importantly, the expensive ritual services that provided the temple's primary income were being ignored as people discovered they could access profound spiritual experiences without paying fees or following institutional protocols. Prasad's most trusted advisor, senior priest Manoj Gupta, suggested a strategy that would escalate the conflict to a dangerous new level. "We need to force a direct confrontation," Gupta argued. "If we can provoke an incident that makes her appear to be a threat to public order, we can justify more aggressive government intervention." The plan that emerged from their discussions was designed to create a situation where Mira would appear to be inciting religious violence or public disorder. Prasad would use his influence to organize a counter-demonstration during one of the riverside gatherings, bringing temple supporters into direct conflict with Mira's followers. "We'll claim that her unauthorized religious activities are creating sectarian tensions and threatening communal harmony." Prasad explained to his inner circle, "Once there's evidence of public disorder, the authorities will have no choice but to ban all gatherings and arrest the organizers." But Prasad underestimated both the spiritual maturity of Mira's followers and the extraordinary effects her voice could produce when she was truly challenged. The confrontation he was planning would indeed create a dramatic incident, but not the kind that would discredit Mira's movement. As word spread about the planned counter-demonstration, Mira and her supporters faced a crucial decision about how to respond to deliberate provocation. Some advocated canceling the gathering to avoid potential violence, while others argued that yielding to intimidation would effectively end their movement. "If we stop gathering because they threaten us with confrontation, we're allowing them to control our spiritual practice through fear," argued Sita Devi during a community planning meeting. "But if we proceed and they create violence, innocent people could be hurt." Mira spent hours in meditation, seeking guidance about how to respond to the escalating conflict. During one of these sessions, she experienced a spiritual vision that would determine her course of action and ultimately lead to the most extraordinary demonstration of vocal power in recorded history. In the vision, Mira saw herself standing before the Temple of Eternal Light, her voice creating acoustic waves that revealed the corruption hidden within its walls while simultaneously offering spiritual healing to everyone present, including her persecutors. She understood that her role was not to defeat the temple's leadership, but to demonstrate a level of spiritual power that would transform the entire situation. "We'll continue the gathering as planned," Mira announced to her supporters, "but we'll expand it. Instead of staying by the river, we'll process through the old city and end at the Temple of Eternal Light itself. It's time to bring our message directly to the people who most need to hear it." The decision to march to the temple represented a fundamental shift from passive resistance to active spiritual confrontation. Mira was prepared to use her voice not just to inspire her followers, but to challenge the physical and spiritual foundations of the corrupt institution that had tried to silence her. Dr. Krishnamurthy was both excited and worried about the implications of Mira's plan. "Based on what we've observed about your vocal abilities, a direct confrontation at the temple could produce effects that we can't predict or control," he warned. "The acoustic properties of that building, combined with the spiritual energies you generate, could create phenomena that transcend anything we've experienced before." "That's exactly what needs to happen," Mira replied with a certainty that surprised even herself. "The temple has become a symbol of spiritual corruption disguised as religious authority. It's time to reveal the truth about what authentic spiritual power can accomplish when it's not constrained by institutional fear. As the date for the confrontation approached, both sides prepared for what would become the defining moment in the struggle between grassroots spiritual authentic and corrupt religious authority. Neither Prasad nor Meera fully understood the forces they were about to unleash when her voice finally met the temple walls that had tried to contain the spiritual revolution she represented. The morning of the great confrontation dawned clear and bright, with thousands of people making their way through the narrow streets of old Varanasi toward the gathering point at the river's edge. Word of Meera's planned procession to the Temple of Eternal Light had spread throughout northern India, attracting spiritual seekers, journalists, and curious observers who sensed they were about to witness something unprecedented. High Priest Prasad had spent the previous evening coordinating with local authorities and organizing his counter-demonstration. Temple supporters, many of whom had been paid to attend, gathered in the temple courtyard carrying signs denouncing unauthorized religious activities and threats to traditional values. Police forces were positioned strategically throughout the old city, officially to maintain order but actually to intervene if the confrontation developed in ways that favored Meera's movement. As the sunrise prayers concluded at the riverside, Meera addressed the assembled crowd with words that would be remembered as one of the most important speeches in modern Indian spiritual history. Standing on the stone platform where she had sung for weeks, her voice carried clearly across the water and into the hearts of everyone present. Today we walk not in anger or opposition, but in demonstration of the spiritual truth that belongs to all people, Meera announced. We walk to show that authentic connection with the divine cannot be controlled by institutions purchased with money, or silenced by those who profit from spiritual ignorance. The procession began slowly, with participants singing traditional hymns as they made their way up the stone steps from the river toward the main streets of the old city. Meera walked at the center of the group, her voice weaving through the collective singing in harmonies that seemed to transform the entire crowd into a single instrument of spiritual expression. As they moved through the narrow alleys, shopkeepers and residents came out to observe the peaceful demonstration. Many joined spontaneously, adding their voices to the growing chorus that seemed to make the ancient stones of the city vibrate with accumulated spiritual energy. The procession grew from hundreds to thousands as it made its way toward the temple district. Dr. Krishnamurthy, walking beside Meera, documented the acoustic phenomena occurring as the crowd moved through different architectural environments. Your voice is interacting with the city's infrastructure in ways that create standing wave patterns, he observed. It's as if the entire old city is becoming a resonance chamber. The effect was indeed extraordinary. Buildings throughout the procession route began exhibiting subtle vibrations that corresponded to the harmonic frequencies the crowd was generating. Windows buzzed sympathetically, metal objects chimed spontaneously, and even the sacred bells in distant temples began ringing without human intervention. High Priest Prasad, monitoring the procession's progress from his office, became increasingly alarmed as reports reached him about the acoustic phenomena accompanying Meera's march. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he told his senior priests. "She's creating some kind of mass hysteria that could have unpredictable consequences." But the phenomena were not hysteria. They were measurable physical effects that electronic monitoring equipment confirmed. Dr. Priya Mehta, the neurologist who had been studying Meera's impact on participants, was taking readings that showed electromagnetic field fluctuations throughout the old city that correlated with the procession's movement. "We're observing energy patterns that suggest resonance effects extending far beyond the immediate area of the demonstration," Dr. Mehta reported to her research team via radio. "It's as if the entire urban environment is responding to the acoustic frequencies being generated." As the procession approached the Temple of Eternal Light, the confrontation Prasad had orchestrated began to unfold. Temple supporters emerged from the courtyard chanting counter-slogans and attempting to block the street leading to the main entrance. Police forces moved into position,
creating a barrier between the two groups that was designed to prevent direct contact. But instead of creating the violent confrontation Prasad had hoped for, the presence of opposition seemed to enhance the spiritual power Mira was channeling. As she began singing directly to the temple supporters, her voice carried frequencies that transcended religious disagreement and spoke to the universal human longing for authentic spiritual connection. Several temple supporters, despite being paid to oppose the demonstration, found themselves moved to tears by the spiritual energy Mira's voice transmitted. Some began questioning whether they were on the right side of the confrontation, while others simply stood in amazed silence as they experienced spiritual feelings they hadn't felt in years of routine temple attendance. "What's happening to our people?" Prasad demanded as he watched from his window, seeing his own supporters being visibly affected by Mira's singing. Why aren't they maintaining their opposition? Senior priest Gupta, who was coordinating the counter-demonstration from the temple courtyard, reported increasing difficulty maintaining organized opposition. "Many of our supporters are being influenced by her voice," he admitted over the radio. "Some are actually joining her crowd instead of opposing it." The situation reached its climax when Mira positioned herself directly in front of the temple's main, facing the massive stone structure that had banned her from participation in religious community life. The thousands of people gathered behind her fell silent, understanding that they were about to witness the confrontation between authentic spiritual power and corrupt institutional authority. Looking up at the ornate facade of the Temple of Eternal Light, Mira felt a profound sadness for the spiritual potential that had been corrupted by centuries of institutional control and political manipulation. But she also felt an enormous surge of spiritual energy that seemed to connect her voice to the deepest sources of divine power. "This temple was built to honor the divine," Mira called out, her voice carrying clearly to everyone present, including the priests watching from their windows. "But it has become a monument to human pride and institutional control. Today we call upon the divine presence that still dwells within these walls to reveal the truth about authentic spiritual power." As Mira began to sing the ancient Sanskrit mantras that represented the original spiritual purpose of the temple, her voice created acoustic effects that would be remembered and studied for generations. The sound waves seemed to penetrate the massive stone walls, creating resonance patterns that made the entire structure vibrate visibly. High Priest Prasad felt the vibrations through the floor of his office, and realized with growing alarm that Mira's voice was affecting the physical integrity of the building itself. "She's doing something to the temple structure," he shouted to his priests. "We need to stop this immediately." But it was too late to stop what Mira had set in motion. Her voice had become a conduit for spiritual forces that were to transform not just the confrontation, but the very foundations of religious authority in northern India.
As Mira's voice rose in the ancient Sanskrit mantras, the acoustic phenomena that had characterized her singing throughout the movement reached a crescendo that defied scientific explanation. The massive stone walls of the Temple of Eternal Light began vibrating with increasing intensity, creating visual effects that could be seen by everyone in the crowd and documented by the numerous cameras recording the event. Dr. Krishnamurthy, monitoring the acoustic readings on his equipment, watched in amazement as the frequency patterns exceeded every measurement they had recorded during previous sessions. "The harmonic resonance is creating standing wave patterns in the stone itself," he reported to Dr. Mehta through his radio headset. "The building is literally becoming a musical instrument." Inside the temple, High Priest Prasad and his senior priests felt the vibrations growing stronger with each phrase of Mira's song. Dust began falling from the ceiling, ancient wooden doors rattled in their frames, and the metal ritual implements started chiming spontaneously in rhythm with her voice. The phenomenon was both beautiful and terrifying, suggesting forces beyond anything they had encountered in their years of religious practice. "The foundation stones are moving," reported Senior Priest Gupta from the lower level of the temple. "I can see visible shifts in the wall joints. If this continues, we could have structural damage." But the vibrations were not causing destructive damage, they were revealing hidden damage that had been concealed for years. As the acoustic waves penetrated the temple's structure, cracks appeared in walls that had been painted over to hide structural problems caused by poor maintenance and diverted construction funds. Hidden chambers became visible as false walls vibrated loose, exposing evidence of the financial corruption that had characterized Prasad's leadership. Mira's voice seemed to be performing a kind of spiritual X-ray on the temple, revealing not just physical problems but the spiritual decay that had infected the institution. Participants in the crowd began reporting visions of the temple's original spiritual purpose, seeing through the layers of institutional corruption to the authentic sacred intentions of its ancient builders. "I can see the temple as it was meant to be," whispered Sita Devi to the people around her, "before the corruption, before the greed, when it was truly a place where people could connect with the divine." The visions were shared experiences, not individual hallucinations. Hundreds of people were simultaneously seeing the same images of the temple's spiritual history, from its construction by devoted craftsmen to its gradual transformation into a profit-making enterprise that exploited rather than served the spiritual needs of the community. As Mira's song reached its peak, the vibrations in the temple walls reached a frequency that caused a dramatic structural revelation. A section of wall in Prasad's private chambers cracked open, exposing a hidden safe containing the financial records he had been concealing from temple auditors and government investigators. The safe's exposure was captured on live television and social media streams, creating immediate evidence of the financial corruption that had funded Prasad's persecution campaign against Mira. Documents spilling from the damaged wall showed evidence of embezzlement, illegal political contributions, and the payment of bribes to government officials. "The temple is revealing its own secrets," Dr. Krishnamurthy observed as he watched the structural revelations continue. "It's as if Mira's voice is compelling the building itself to expose the truth about what's been happening inside it." Prasad, realizing that his corruption was being literally exposed by the acoustic phenomena, made a desperate decision to stop Mira's singing by force. He called the police commanders he had bribed over the years, demanding immediate intervention to arrest her for inciting public disorder and threatening public safety. But the police officers on the scene were as affected by Mira's voice as everyone else. Many reported experiencing profound spiritual experiences that reminded them of their original motivation for serving the public good. Several officers quietly refused orders to arrest Mira, while others openly joined the crowd that had gathered to support her. Inspector Ramesh Chaudhuri, the senior police official supposedly in charge of maintaining order, found himself moved to tears by the spiritual energy radiating from Mira's voice. "I became a police officer to protect people and serve justice," he told his subordinates. "This young woman represents everything we should be protecting, not arresting." As Mira's song continued, the acoustic effects reached a climax that would be studied by scientists and spiritual practitioners for decades. The temple walls began producing their own harmonic frequencies, as if the ancient stones were remembering their original sacred purpose and responding to the spiritual energy Mira was channeling. The sound created by the interaction between Mira's voice and the temple's structural resonance was audible for miles throughout Varanasi. People throughout the old city stopped their activities to listen to what many described as the most beautiful and spiritually moving sound they had ever heard. But the most dramatic moment came when the acoustic pressure finally exceeded the structural integrity of the false ceiling in the temple's main worship hall. The decorative panels that had hidden evidence of diverted construction funds crashed to the floor, revealing the shoddy workmanship and substandard materials that had resulted from Prasad's embezzlement of temple renovation funds. The collapse was captured by news cameras and broadcast live across India, providing visual evidence of the institutional corruption that Mira's movement had been challenging from the beginning. The contrast between the temple's ornate facade and its deteriorated hidden infrastructure became a powerful metaphor for the spiritual decay that had infected the institution. High Priest Prasad, watching his carefully maintained deception crumble along with the physical structure of his temple, realized that his position had become untenable. The acoustic revelation of his corruption, broadcast live to millions of viewers, made denial impossible and prosecution inevitable. "Stop singing," Prasad shouted from his office window, his voice barely audible over the harmonic resonance that continued to build between Mira's voice and the temple structure. "You're destroying everything." But Mira's response, delivered through her continued singing, made clear that destruction was not her purpose. Her voice shifted to frequencies that seemed designed to heal rather than expose, offering spiritual energy that could repair both the physical damage to the temple and the spiritual damage caused by years of corruption. The healing frequencies had an immediate effect on everyone present, including Prasad himself. For the first time in years, the high priest felt the authentic spiritual calling that had originally drawn him to religious service, before ambition and greed had corrupted his motivations. As Mira's song reached its conclusion, the temple walls gradually stopped vibrating, but the transformation of the entire situation was complete. The evidence of corruption was exposed, the authentic spiritual power of her voice was undeniable. And the larger course in the hours following Mira's extraordinary vocal demonstration at the Temple of Eternal Light, the exposed evidence of corruption became the center of intense investigation by government authorities, media organizations, and religious oversight bodies. The documents that had spilled from High Priest Prasad's hidden safe provided a detailed record of financial crimes spanning more than a decade. Government investigators, led by Chief Financial Inspector Ashok Shah, worked through the night cataloging evidence of embezzlement, tax evasion, and illegal political contributions that totaled millions of rupees. The financial records revealed a systematic pattern of corruption that extended far beyond the Temple of Eternal Light to include a network of religious institutions across northern India. "This is the most comprehensive evidence of institutional religious corruption we've ever uncovered," Inspector Sharma told the media during a press conference the morning after the confrontation. "The acoustic phenomena that exposed these documents has provided us with evidence that traditional investigative methods might never have discovered." High Priest Prasad, facing inevitable arrest and prosecution, made a final desperate attempt to control the narrative by claiming that Mira's acoustic abilities represented some form of supernatural threat to public safety. In a rambling statement to news organizations, he argued that her voice had created dangerous and uncontrollable spiritual forces that could threaten social stability. But Prasad's claims were immediately contradicted by scientific analysis of the acoustic phenomena and medical examination of everyone who had participated in the confrontation. Dr. Priya Mehta's team found no evidence of harm among participants. Instead, they documented significant improvements in stress indicators, mental clarity, and overall physical health. Every measurable effect of Ms. Sharma's vocal techniques has been beneficial to participants, Dr. Mehta reported. "We've observed reduced inflammation markers, improved cardiovascular function, and enhanced neurological activity associated with emotional regulation and cognitive clarity." The medical evidence supported what participants had been reporting for months, that Mira's voice created healing rather than harmful effects, promoting physical and emotional well-being that lasted long after exposure to her singing. Videos of the temple confrontation showed people experiencing profound emotional healing, spiritual insight, and renewed commitment to ethical behavior. More importantly, for the broader implications of the case, religious scholars from universities across India began studying the acoustic recordings to understand how Mira's techniques related to ancient spiritual practices described in Sanskrit texts. Dr. Ananda Krishnamurthy published preliminary findings that suggested her vocal methods represented a rediscovery of authentic Vedic sound meditation techniques. Ms. Sharma appears to have intuitive access to acoustic principles that were fundamental to original Hindu spiritual practice but have been lost through centuries of institutional modification, Dr. Krishnamurthy explained during a scholarly conference. Her techniques demonstrate that authentic spiritual power can emerge naturally through sincere devotion and practice, without requiring institutional mediation. The academic validation of Mira's abilities provided intellectual credibility that complemented the empirical evidence of her positive effects. Religious communities across India began questioning whether their own institutions were serving spiritual or administrative purposes, leading to reform movements in temples throughout the country. The legal consequences for Prasad and his associates developed rapidly. Within a week of the temple confrontation, criminal charges were filed for embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of religious authority. The evidence was so comprehensive that plea negotiations began immediately, with prosecutors offering reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation in investigating the broader network of corruption. But perhaps the most significant consequence was the transformation of religious practice that Mira's movement had inspired. Grassroots spiritual communities began forming throughout northern India, based on the model of authentic practice and financial transparency that characterized the warehouse gatherings. The Temple of Eternal Light itself underwent dramatic changes following Prasad's arrest. Interim religious authorities, working with government overseers, initiated a complete restructuring of temple operations based on principles of transparency, accessibility, and genuine spiritual service. The hidden structural damage revealed by Mira's voice was repaired using donations from people who wanted to support authentic religious practice. Mira meanwhile found herself in the unexpected position of being offered leadership roles in various religious organizations that wanted to benefit from her credibility and spiritual abilities. But her response demonstrated the authenticity that had characterized her movement from the beginning. "I'm not interested in becoming another religious authority figure," Mira told reporters during a press conference at the rebuilt warehouse facility. "The whole point of our movement is that authentic spiritual connection doesn't require institutional hierarchy or formal leadership structures. Everyone has access to divine connection through sincere practice and devotion." Instead of accepting institutional positions, Mira focused on developing educational programs that could teach others the vocal meditation techniques she had discovered. Working with Dr. Krishnamurthy and other academic supporters, she created training workshops that emphasized the scientific and spiritual principles underlying effective sound meditation. The workshops attracted participants from around the world, including musicians, spiritual practitioners, and researchers interested in understanding the relationship between acoustic phenomena and consciousness. But Mira insisted that the training remain accessible to people regardless of their economic circumstances, maintaining the same principles of inclusivity that had characterized her original movement. Spiritual development should never be limited by someone's ability to pay fees or meet institutional requirements, Mira explained during one of the early training sessions. If these techniques can help people connect with divine sources of healing and wisdom, then everyone should have access to learn them. The international attention surrounding Mira's story led to documentary films, academic studies, and government policy discussions about the role of authentic spiritual practice in modern society. Her case became a symbol of grassroots resistance to institutional corruption and the power of individual spiritual development to create positive social change. But for Mira herself, the most important outcome was the transformation she had witnessed in the lives of people who had participated in her movement. Former participants reported lasting improvements in their physical health, emotional stability, and sense of spiritual connection that continued long after the dramatic confrontation at the temple. "The real miracle isn't what my voice can do to buildings," Mira reflected during an interview 6 months after the temple incident. "The real miracle is what authentic spiritual practice can do to help people remember their own divine nature and their capacity to create positive change in the world." The Temple of Eternal Light continued operating under new management, but its role had fundamentally changed from a symbol of religious authority to a demonstration of transparency and authentic spiritual service. The acoustic damage caused by Mira's voice had been completely repaired, but the spiritual transformation it had catalyzed would influence religious practice in India for generations to come. 1 year after the dramatic confrontation at the Temple of Eternal, the effects of Mira's vocal demonstration had created a transformation in religious practice that extended far beyond Varanasi. Grassroots spiritual communities inspired by her example had formed in cities across India, while international attention had attracted researchers, spiritual seekers, and reform advocates from around the world. The academic study of Mira's vocal techniques had evolved into a legitimate field of research combining acoustics, neuroscience, and consciousness studies. Ananda Krishnamurthy published the definitive academic analysis of her methods, documenting how specific harmonic frequencies could induce measurable changes in brain activity, stress hormones, and immune system function. We're discovering that ancient spiritual traditions contain sophisticated understanding of how sound can affect human consciousness and physical health, Dr. Krishnamurthy explained during a presentation at the International Conference on Consciousness and Sound. Ms. Sharma's intuitive rediscovery of these techniques is helping us understand principles that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. Universities across India and Europe began offering courses in sacred acoustics and therapeutic sound meditation, drawing on the research generated by studying Mira's techniques. Medical schools incorporated sound therapy into their curricula, while music conservatories developed programs that combined artistic training with spiritual practice. The legal consequences of the temple corruption case had meanwhile created precedents that affected religious institutions throughout India. Government oversight of temple finances became more stringent, while new regulations required transparency in religious organization operations and spending. The reforms were often referred to as Mira's laws in recognition of her role in exposing institutional corruption. High Priest Prasad, serving his sentence in prison, had undergone a personal transformation that surprised his former associates and legal observers. The experience of hearing Mira's voice during the temple confrontation had awakened spiritual feelings he had suppressed for years, leading to genuine repentance and a commitment to making amends for his corruption. I spent so many years focused on institutional power and personal wealth that I forgot why I originally entered religious service, Prasad wrote in a letter that was published in several Indian newspapers. Ms. Sharma's voice reminded me of the authentic spiritual calling that I had abandoned. I'm grateful for the opportunity to rediscover my true purpose, even under these circumstances. Prasad's transformation included cooperation with ongoing investigations of religious corruption, helping authorities understand how institutional systems could be reformed to prevent similar abuses. His testimony led to reforms in temple governance that emphasized accountability, transparency, and genuine spiritual service over political and financial considerations. The Temple of Eternal Light itself had become a model for reformed religious practice, operating under new leadership that emphasized accessibility, transparency, and authentic spiritual development. The physical repairs necessitated by Mira's acoustic revelation had been completed using donations from people who wanted to support genuinely reformed religious institutions. But the most significant transformation was in the daily spiritual practice of ordinary people throughout the region. The warehouse gatherings had evolved into a network of community meditation centers where people could learn and practice the vocal techniques Mira had demonstrated, creating a grassroots movement that operated independently of traditional religious hierarchy. Mira continued teaching and developing her techniques, but she resisted all attempts to institutionalize her role or create formal religious authority around her abilities. Instead, she focused on training others to teach the methods, ensuring that the knowledge would remain accessible and couldn't be controlled by any single organization. The goal is to help people discover their own authentic spiritual abilities, Mira explained during a teacher training workshop attended by participants from 15 countries. Everyone has the capacity for direct spiritual connection. My role is just to help people remember and develop abilities they already possess. The international expansion of Mira's movement had created diplomatic and cultural exchanges that promoted understanding between different religious traditions. Her techniques proved effective regardless of participants' religious backgrounds, suggesting universal principles that transcended sectarian differences. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist from Stanford University, who had studied Mira's techniques extensively, published research showing that the acoustic meditation methods produced beneficial effects across all cultural and religious groups. We're observing universal human responses to specific sound frequencies that appear to be hardwired into our neurological and spiritual development, Dr. Chen reported. The research attracted attention from medical organizations interested in developing sound-based therapies for various health conditions. Preliminary studies suggested that Mira's vocal techniques could complement conventional treatments for anxiety, depression, chronic pain, and immune system disorders. Medical applications of the techniques were being tested in hospitals and clinics throughout India and internationally, with promising results for both physical and psychological healing. The combination of ancient spiritual wisdom and modern scientific validation was creating new approaches to healthcare that addressed both symptoms and underlying causes of illness. But perhaps the most important long-term impact was the example Mira's movement had set for grassroots resistance to institutional corruption. Her success in exposing and reforming religious authority through authentic spiritual practice had inspired similar movements in other sectors of society. Educational reformers, environmental activists, and political transparency began studying Mira's methods for challenging institutional corruption through positive demonstration of authentic alternatives. Her approach of focusing on constructive change rather than destructive opposition had proven more effective than traditional protest methods. What makes Mira's movement so powerful is that it doesn't just criticize corrupt institutions, it demonstrates better alternatives, observed Dr. Priya Patel, a political scientist studying grassroots reform movements. By showing people what authentic spiritual practice looks like, she made institutional corruption seem obviously inferior and unnecessary. The combination of spiritual authenticity, scientific validation, and social reform had created a model for positive change that was being adapted and applied in various contexts around the world. Mira's voice had indeed shaken more than temple walls, it had demonstrated the power of individual spiritual development to transform entire social systems. As the first anniversary of the temple confrontation approached, Mira reflected on the unexpected journey that had transformed her from a banned devotee into an internationally recognized pioneer of spiritual and social reform. But her focus remained on the individual people whose lives had been changed by discovering their own capacity for spiritual practice. The real success isn't the institutional changes or the international attention, Mira told a gathering of her original supporters at the Rebuild War. The real success is seeing people discover that they don't need permission from anyone to connect with divine sources of wisdom, healing, and peace. That's a realization that no institution can control or corrupt. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on the screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.